What's going on YouTube? We're gonna do a action job on this gp100. So this is gonna be fast, but let's get to it. Tools you'll need: screwdriver, punches, trim nail, Dremel, the mcarbo flitz metal gun polish, and the mcarbo spring kit for obviously a gp100. Okay, just to start, let's show what the original trigger pull is. Double action is 10 pounds. Single action is 4 1/4. Now the first thing you want to do is to remove your grip. Now it might be different depending on what the grip you have, but just slide that sucker off. And you're going to pull the hammer back. Take your trim nail and stick it in that little hole just to then release the tension on the spring so you can get that sucker out of there. Now we're gonna do the spring first, so let's get to it. Now this is gonna be a little challenging, so what you're gonna do is you're gonna push down on the spring, compress it, remove the trim nail, and carefully decompress the spring so it doesn't go flying. Now make note of how your spring setup is oriented. You want this part on the angle, so we're just going to keep that like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to polish this up first. Alright, you're going to take your metal polish, you're just going to get that nice and covered. Now you want to have like a little paper towel or towel backdrop so it's easier to clean your finger off, but all you're going to do is just take your Dremel and start shining away. Okay, you'll know that you're doing this right when your tip starts to turn black and this starts getting nice and smooth, but that's what we want. So now let's install the new spring. Alright, here's the new spring. A little bit shinier, a little bit longer, but it is a less poundage weight. So let's just get everything set up how we want it. Remember that orientation you had? Well, this is the tricky part. Alright, and now we have it compressed. Now they gave you some super lube. You're going to put that on the spring right before you install it right back into the gun, but this part is done. Okay, next we're going to do the hammer. So we're going to pull the little pin out. If my fingernails can get it. You're going to pull the trigger back a little bit. That will slide the hammer out, and the hammer is out. Now you're going to need a 1 16th punch to punch that part out. It is spring loaded, so just be careful when you take it out. But take note of your hammer and see any wear marks. So I have some wear marks on the left side here and the right side. Now they gave you some hammer shims. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a shim on this side and this side. So once this is all polished up, hopefully there's no wear marks from the frame of the gun on here. But let's polish this guy up. What you're going to do, just take your punch, put your finger there, punch that little pin out. Don't lose that pin. Slowly release it. Remember the orientation of this part. You got a spring in there, so just don't lose that. See, there it is. Set that aside, and then just get to polishing these two parts. Alright. Now you're going to want to take a Q-tip and you want to get where that pin sits on the hammer and just swirl around in there. Try to polish the inside up there. It will help. you're not going to be able to get the best job in there, but whatever you do helps. Now another piece you want to polish is this pin that the hammer rotates on. It is blued, so if you don't want to polish it and ruin your bluing, don't polish it. But if you want to get a, nice smoother rotate for that hammer, polish this part. Okay, now we're going to reassemble the hammer. Drop your little spring in there. Alright. Remember the orientation of your little thing right here is going to be long side down. Use your punch to kind of guide that in so you can then take the pin and reverse the punch out. And boom. Your hammer is now polished. It's all ready to go. Wipe it down, make sure all the flits or however you want to pronounce it is off. And let's move on to the trigger group. But look how shiny that is. Set that aside. Alright, we have the trigger group out, and what we're going to start with is we're going to be careful and we're going to barely pull the trigger back and get the transfer bar out of there. Now we're going to polish this whole part up. Won't be an issue to do that. Next, might be easier if you have a little sandwich bag. But we are going to remove this part. Now you want to grab the trigger, pull it back, and then just slowly slide that part. And the only reason I say grab a sandwich bag is because there is a spring in there, and it's obviously spring loaded, and that bag will catch that part. Okay. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to push this in and use your punch and take the pin out right there. Don't lose the pin. Next part you're going to want to take out is the trigger itself. Just push that little pin out and the trigger will come out. Now there are two parts in this trigger that you want to keep. Notice this little guy right here, and then if you drop this guy out, just notice you want to keep it the same way that it came out of. So that little part goes just like that. The smaller side of this part here sits just like that. So set those aside. You're going to polish those, and you have your trigger assembly disassembled once this little spring is out. Now the spring you're going to replace sits right in here. Having a tough time pulling this out. It's a little oily. There we go. Again, remember the orientation. This is going to sit just like that with that flat part upwards in the trigger. Got your spring. Now there is one more part in there. Probably see it on camera right there. It's right here. If you can get it out, great. If you can't, don't worry about it. Alright, first things first, where that bit larger spring sits, you're going to take a Q-tip and your polish, and you're just going to go in there and polish the inside of there. Now this part is blued, so just be careful what you polish, what you don't polish. There's bluing inside of here, so we're technically removing a little bit of bluing by doing this, but the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to put some of that lube in there so it will help protect the gun from any rust. Alright, with this piece still attached, we are going to polish the top side of that and the sides and make it nice and shiny. Now it doesn't take much to polish this stuff, and a good rule of thumb is you can always take away material, but you can never add it back, so just be careful what you do. That's all done. Now we're just going to wipe it away. Careful not to take it all apart because it is spring loaded and you don't want to just deal with the spring in there. Just easier to leave this part on. But that part is nice and shiny now. Alrighty. Now if you want to, you can polish the inside where the trigger sits. That helps, but this is a blued part, so if you don't want to polish it, don't polish it. You'll remove the bluing, but up to you. Alright, polishing the transfer bar. Just get that flitz nice and on there. And this is also probably about the time when you want to change out your felt tip. An important part you want to polish is this little cylinder right there. That's where it sits inside the trigger. So if it's nice and polished, it'll help rotate. Just wipe away the excess. The part will be nice and warm. It's alright. It's just the friction. And you also can feel the polished part through your gloves, which is, when you do this, you'll tell it's nice and polished and it feels quite nice. Set that one aside, move on to the next. Do the same thing with this part. Alright, this part's ready to go. Next, we can get this little guy. Okay, this part is nice and polished. Move on to the trigger. Just get the sides nice and cleaned up and you're good there. You can definitely do the sear a little bit and just touch it up. Just be careful. Alright, there is the trigger all nice and polished. Almost to a mirror shine, which is nice. And you can definitely do the inside of the curve here. That will definitely get pretty close to a mirror finish. But yeah, it's looking good. Now, if you want to attempt to polish these small parts right here, you can. It will help, but it is incredibly challenging, so up to you. Alright, now we're going to reassemble the trigger group. So if you did get that little part out, we're going to start with that. Remember, this little plunger goes forward and this little dimple will go inwards. And that is because that little dimple is going to meet up with that little part right there. Alright, next we are going to put our little piece back into the trigger right here. Now there is a little hole on both sides. Just make sure it's all cleaned up from your polish. Still had some in there. But smaller side goes forward. Alright. And then just drop that guy in there. Make sure you get that little tail piece into that hole there. Line up your things. You can take your punch and help you out here. And then get your little pins here. Alright, trigger is installed. Next is the fun parts. Now, the hardest part, really, is this little spring here. You're going to install it like that, but you got to be careful to not lose it. So you're going to keep the trigger back, take your little part, push it in, and the best way to do this is maybe take your larger punch, push that spring down. Alright, we had a little camera malfunction, but let's get back to it. Alright, we're installing this part. Okay, once you have that part in, you just want to make sure that you get the trigger all the way forward so that spring can fully seat. And next, you're going to take your transfer bar, next you're going to take your transfer bar, pull the trigger back a little bit just to get it seated, and we're in. Alright, now you're going to take your new spring. Now this one will be a little bit challenging just because it's a little bit longer, but it's, like I said, it still compresses easier. You're going to take your lube, you're going to lube up this spring here. Just get it nice and all lubed up. Okay. Drop your spring in there. Now this is the other challenging part. You got to keep this little part here with the flat face upwards. So you can now take that pin and repin it. It is a little challenging. You can also take your punch, not that punch, this punch, and help you out here. Okay. Now we have the punch seated with it. Now we gotta very carefully back it up with the actual pin. Oops. Lost my pin there. Okay, I got the piece in. Now it's challenging because you're trying to decompress that spring, but what you're gonna do is you're gonna use your punch. It's gonna make it easier. Get your punch set in there to where it's all fitted. Then you're gonna pull your punch out just about a little bit so you can put your little pin in. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna use your table and you're going to decompress this little thing with pressure on the pin, and just slowly push that pin in with the use of a hard surface because it will tear up your fingers. But that is everything. Let's get the gun reassembled and see how it looks. One more thing, with the lube, you're gonna lube up your hammer in the hole where the pin sits, and you are going to lube up your spring here. So let's just get ahead and go and do that so it's all ready to go. All right, we'll get a little bit on here. This will just help the hammer rotate a little bit. Nothing too fancy. Get some in here. Now the other thing that we're gonna do is we have those hammer shims. We're going to open this little container up, and we're just gonna do one on each side. Make it easy on yourself. Now just put some lube on both sides. It will help keep the shims in place. So we'll just do this. Wrap it around there. And then that shim's not going to fall off. It'll make it easier putting that hammer in with those shims attached. Get that all looped up. All right. Now we can reassemble the gun. All right, first things first is putting the trigger group back into the gun. All right, next is the hammer. Now this is a little bit tricky because you have the shim. All right, and then we're all seated. Wipe away any of the excess lube there. Now those shims will just help make that hammer not slide against the frame of the gun. And now, last but not least, our last spring. All right, that already feels a lot better. Now, let's test her out. Okay, we're what, 11 pounds or 10 pounds on the double action. Looks like 7-ish pounds. All right. Try this again. 2.5 pounds. So 4 1/4 to 2.5 pounds is great. Now we took this old 90s gp100 and gave it some new life, polished all the internal parts, and made that hammer where that action runs so much better. Let me know what you guys think, and hopefully you found this helpful. But thanks for watching.